Hi, Brian.
Good morning, Paula.
Good morning. All right. So, on Things That Matter with Brian Batter, we've been really like, okay, here are some great topics to help you understand Bitcoin and how to get out of debt faster. Today, I really want to pull back the curtain and ask an uncomfortable question. Um, I'll start by just in case anybody doesn't know, our country is in 34 trillion with a T, trillion dollars worth of debt. Even more
Incredible.
scary, as of today in real time, we are overspending as a government $1.8 trillion more than we bring in.
Yeah.
Uh, how does this play out? Like, how is this going to continue? What's going to happen? Like, I think somebody needs to talk about this, and it's going to
Yeah.
be
Well, I appreciate that. Well, first things first, there's a lot of people talking about this, but the reality is there's not a lot of people that are really listening because this isn't a conversation that's comfortable for people, because it causes some considerable self-reflection, and ultimately some potentially some really hard choices for individuals to make if they want to stand for principles. Well, the first thing, as you mentioned, right now what's on the books, if you will, is $34 trillion worth of debt. If you consider what's off the books, things like Social Security, Medicare, it's actually closer to 200 trillion plus. So we've got some real issues here. And most people have never been. None of this stuff has ever been explained. They don't talk about this stuff in schools. So most people who graduate with a degree in economics, right? They don't talk about. They didn't talk about this stuff when I got my degree. And my personal belief, after nearly 2 decades in this industry, helping people understand the basics, they don't teach this stuff, and they on purpose. They want people to be unaware or ignorant of what's actually happening. And so what we really want to talk about today is what's likeliest to happen. Now, I'm not a soothsayer, not Nostradamus here. If I were, be on a beach in Bora Bora somewhere, right? That's not possible. However, we can study the past and learn from history. So one simple example that we can consider when we look back is what happened to Germany between World War I and World War II. And after World War I, Germany lost the war. They were in a massive amount of debt. And what ended up happening was their currency became inflated. They began printing money. Sound familiar? Right?
yes.
And so, right, what ended up happening over the course of a few years, less than 10 years, was people at the end of the 10th year found that it was cheaper to burn the money for heat than it was to burn wood. The wood was more valuable than the money because it was just overprinted. It meant nothing. It was meaningless. And that's what we say, oh, it's monopoly money. Well, that's actually physically what happened and realistically what happened in Weimar, Germany, in between World War I and World War II. Obviously, the people weren't happy about it. But what did they do? What were their solutions? They started buying things like hard assets. Now, today we think, oh, hard assets, land, gold, things like that. They bought cast iron pans and lamps, right? Things that people actually needed because they had trade value. And this is a very important thing for people to understand, that money doesn't have value in and of itself, right? It's something that you and I agree upon to exchange. It's a means of exchange. Well, if we don't agree that this money is worth anything, we're going to look to find something else. If we don't think this piece of paper is worth anything, well, you know what? I like your TV, or, that bookshelf, the bookends you have. I'll trade you X, go barter. That's what happened then. So I'm not saying that that's, an inevitable future here for us in the West, but there will absolutely be certain communities that will accept things in trade as opposed to paper currency, fiat currency, because they're losing value. And the reason why they're losing value is the structural spending versus revenue issue for the government. If you think of the US government as your house, as a family, every month this family is spending more money than they bring in. We all know people like this, right? Well, whatever reason, they spend more than they earn. We can, cast value judgments on why they do that. We'll put that for another conversation. But the reality is a lot of people are spending more than they bring in. The way they cover that gap each month is either using their savings, they eat their savings to support the current lifestyle, or they use debt. They borrow the money. Okay, well, that's what's been happening here. The United States hasn't been spending its savings. It's been borrowing money. Now, as a politician, we hear this. I don't believe that there's such a thing as two parties. There's not. There's really one party. They just have two names. And the reason is both parties benefit from increased government spending. Neither one of them want to shrink it. You'll hear politicians say, like, we cut spending. No, you didn't. What they did is they cut the rate of growth of the spending. And so even the spending never actually goes down. So if we look at this as a household, and that household was spending more than they brought in, at the end of the year, they're going to have more debt at the end of the year than they did at the beginning. Well, if they keep the same pattern, they spend more than they bring in, the following year, they're going to have even more debt. So as a politician, you can run on a platform saying, we need to tax more people or have people pay more in taxes, which in theory sounds nice. Okay, well, take more money from those who have it, whether it be tax the wealthy, tax corporations, whatever the idea, and use that to pay down the debt. Since 1980, you can see the amount of revenue the government brings in has gone up 10 times. In 1980, the government brought in $600 billion, right, of revenue, tax revenue. In 2025, it's expected in about 2024, here we are right now, it's going to be closer to about $6 trillion of revenue. So it's nearly 10 times more tax. So we are paying way more in taxes now than we ever have. But look at what's happened to the spending. And it doesn't matter whether you have a president with an R next to their name or a D next to their name. They're all spending like drunken sailors. It's ridiculous. $34 trillion in debt right now. Back in 1980, it was less than $1 trillion. Okay, so two solutions here. Cut spending and start applying that tax money to pay down debt. Good luck being that politician, though. Hey, we're going to cut your Social Security checks. We got to cut your Medicare checks. We got to cut money for any education. We got to cut money to the military. We got to cut money to all these different programs because we need to pay back our debt now. How likely is it that politician actually gets elected? All right? It's a tough one. On the other hand, if we were not going to cut spending, actually reduce the amount we spend, well, the other solution is raise taxes. Well, we can see taxes have already gone up 10 times. The tax revenue has gone up 10 times in the past 40 years. We're making 10 times more tax revenue now than we did 40 years ago. Okay, so imagine being that politician. We're going to raise taxes on everybody, right? Because, by the way, the income tax, when it was introduced, it was supposed to only affect the top 1% of income earners. That's how it was marketed to the public. Now everybody's paying it. I should say almost everybody. Everybody's obligated to pay it. Probably a better way to say it. About half of the people in the country don't pay income taxes because they get refunds. The other half actually owes money to actually pay into the system. But it was only supposed to hit 1% of the population, the top 1% income earners. So no politician is going to get elected saying we're going to cut your spending, you're going to cut your benefits, we're going to cut government spending and all the jobs that will be lost because of that. Nor is a politician going to get elected saying we're raising taxes on everybody, meaning we're going to attack our debt problem. That's been talked about, but there never actually be about it, if you will, over the past 40 years. So the third option, if they can't raise taxes and they're not going to be able to cut the spending, what's the solution as a government? And the answer is inflation, meaning creating more money. Now, for those of you guys over a certain age, you might remember the Goonies, right? And in the Goonies, the Fratelli brothers, right, had a counterfeiting machine, a printer in the basement of the restaurant. That's where data was like $50 bill, right? They were just making money. Well, imagine if they, as a government who can create the currency, said, we're going to borrow $1 trillion. And then the thought was, well, how are they going to pay it back? Well, they got the money printer. They'll just print another $1 trillion. They could literally print the money right now and pay off the debt. Some people in economic theory, it's called modern monetary theory, they think that's all you can do. It's not going to hurt anybody. Who cares? We're just paying it back to ourselves. But what ends up happening is now we have more money, more dollars in the economy. When you have more money chasing the same amount of goods, the price of the goods goes up. This is simple, basic economics. At the end of the day, you can't do anything without a trade-off. So what we're inevitably going to see is the cost of living continuing to go up, which is affecting more and more people. And we're going to get to a flashpoint where I personally believe we're going to see millions of people opting out of this. We're going to look to renegotiate the social contract by starving the government of revenue. And that means not paying taxes. Yes, the IRS can't come after everybody. They're going to come after certain individuals, right? But the reality is that if you don't agree with what's going on, and if you believe your vote at this point now is effectively meaningless because no matter which way you vote, the animal, the beast that controls DC isn't affected by it because either parties, whether it's R or D, they both want to spend more money. Doesn't matter who you vote for. Well, if we all agree that that's not really changing things, well, the only thing we can do is en masse be like nonviolent. We're not marching on any capitals. We're not picking up our arms. We're just saying, I choose not to play this game. It's the only solution that's viable. But the challenge is enough people have to buy in. Not everybody, but enough people have to buy in. Well, okay, what about those who don't? Well, that chart, you don't have to bring it back up, but the chart shows what the actual inflation rate has been over the past 40 years if we continue to use the old formula that the government used back in the early 80s. When I say formula, the formula to calculate what's called consumer price index, the rate of inflation, the rate of rising prices. Well, in the 80s, the formula was changed. And the reason why, very simply, was that the Social Security checks paid out, the increases to those checks, it's called the COLA, cost of living adjustment, that increase was tied directly to what's called the Consumer Price Index, which the government produces through the Department of Labor, the Bureau of Labor and Statistics. They create this number, and that number affects the checks. That affects how much the government has to spend on Social Security. Well, in the 80s, our good friends in Congress tinkered with the formula to reduce the rate of growth of the CPI, to make it look better. And they did this by removing some of the items that they used to use to calculate the average cost of a family's lifestyle. Instead of steak, they replaced it with hamburger, right? They started adding some things called hedonic adjustments. We don't need to get into the weeds on that. But what the point of this is, if we use the inflation formula from 1980, the inflation rate would be closer to 9 or 10% per year over the past 30-odd years. And what that means is the government has been printing more money, effectively making the debt they owe painless to them, but absolutely destroying the quality of life and the upward mobility of the average person in the US. And this is also in the West. And the end result of this is the people closest to the money printers, the people who have, well, they work with non-governmental agencies or non-governmental organizations. These are nonprofits that are funded by government grants. They benefited significantly. Companies that have direct influence on the government, like the military-industrial complex, like the educational complex, they receive government subsidies and direct government payments. Well, they've done really well. They're really happy about the way things are going because when the dollars are printed, it goes to them first since they're the closest to the money printer. They then, and the people who own the companies and have the highest salaries in those companies and all their friends. It's a very large group of people, but in comparison to the rest of the population, very tiny group of people. But we're not talking about 10 people. We're talking about 10,000s of people who are structurally benefiting by more money being created. They're in front. They're closest to the money printer. So they then buy assets. They don't want to hold the dollars. They buy assets. One of the reasons we've seen the real estate market go up over the past 30, 40 years. It's not because homes are worth more. It's because there's more dollars chasing relatively the same amount of homes. Same thing with the stock market. Companies aren't necessarily earning more on the whole. Some companies are doing really well, but many companies, especially if you look at the S&P right now, the growth in the S&P is driven by less than 10 companies. What about the other 490? They're not doing all that well. And so this is something called the Cantillon effect. A French economist a few hundred years ago effectively realized that if you are friendly with the central bankers, you are now able to use dollars that are printed before the inflation, the rising prices hits everybody else. So you can buy hard assets like the pots and pans and the candles and the lamps that Weimar Germans bought. They would buy things that held value in an inflationary environment like real estate and like stocks. And so what we've seen is this massive disparity between a handful, a small percentage of people near the top and everyone else. And that is a recipe for major challenges. The other, you remember Occupy Wall Street like 10, 12 years ago? It was built on this principle, the 1%. Well, most entrepreneurs, by and large, are good people. But I would question a lot of those who benefit from government largesse, meaning they're not necessarily bringing new products to the market. Now, there's some great technologies that are benefiting humanity, but those many organizations tied into the government that benefit from this result of printed money, they're not adding real value. And the way you can check that is, well, perfect examples, look at the homeless situation around the country. Cities have spent billions of dollars, and the problem has only persisted to get worse. So it's not a money issue then, because they spend more money and the problem persists. There's a consortium of people that really benefit from that. Well, they can only do that because the government is printing more money. If the government stopped that, if we had sound money like we had back in the day, that wouldn't be possible. The community would have to step up and help those individuals who unfortunately find themselves homeless, in mental distress, maybe in drug addiction. The community would support them as we used to. There actually used to be a mental health structure in this country. We don't have that anymore. Well, long answer to a short question. We're facing some major challenges, and you cannot just listen to a soundbite on legacy media. It's time to start doing some diligence and really asking, what is a real solution? The voting booth is not a solution. I'm not telling you not to vote. I'm saying you absolutely must. It's your civic duty, but you can't expect your vote to change things, because fundamentally the structure, the system that we live under now, it's not capitalism any longer. It's not. It's corporatism. It's crony capitalism, where only a handful of organizations and corporations truly benefit from the largesse, the spending of the government. They insulate themselves. They try and crowd out competition at the expense of everybody else. This is no longer a real free enterprise economy. It's more centrally planned, which is why people are looking for solutions, and things like Bitcoin continue to pop up amongst circles of people who have assets, who want to figure out a way. And even amongst those people who are unbanked, they don't have bank accounts and just figure out the system has already screwed me. I have no chance. What else can I do? People are seeing it as an opt-out, because this structural system, spending more than we take in, is only viable as long as the dollar is the world's reserve currency. Once that begins to slip, this ability to spend unlimited sums of money is not going to be, it's not going to be possible. And I'm not saying that we're going to go to, guns ablaze and go to war, civil. I don't believe that's going to ultimately happen. There will be flashpoints. There will be people arguing with each other and bring it to fisticuffs. But ultimately, what's likeliest to be the best course of action is if enough people, I don't know what that percentage is. I'd love to bring people into our conversation and ask them. We might have more knowledge about this, but we don't need everybody. The American Revolution did not have 100% support of the inhabitants of the colonies at the time. It was just about less than 10% of the people actually supported. A good portion were indifferent, and another equal portion were loyalists to the monarchy. It's the same idea now. You got 10% on one side that are super loud, 10% on the other side that are super loud. They're both moderately crazy. And then you have 80% in the middle, like, you guys are nuts, man. But what can we do to fix this? We only need a small percentage, maybe 1 out of 6. I don't know. If we have enough people say, I'm done with this, we're going to opt out and we need to renegotiate this. I don't know how that ultimately plays, how it looks, but I know what plays out is sound, how it ends is sound money, where all of our children and our children's children's children can live in an environment where they're not chasing their tail. Just live by the. For those of you guys who've read Alice in Wonderland, all right, you remember here we have to run as fast as we can to stay in the same place. That's not fair to our children, our grandchildren, and their children. Someone has to step up and take the difficult decision. And maybe we sacrifice some standard living quality of life for a period of time so that the future generations can thrive. That's why we call the greatest generation, those people who fought in World War II, we call them the greatest generation because they made the ultimate sacrifice so that the world could be rid of toxic ideologies. They've resurfaced. I don't know at this point now we could really go to war in that way and win it. But I think we can individually make decisions that in the long run will starve the beast of its weapon, which is money, and hopefully put our future citizens in a much better position to win. So it's a hard conversation, man. I apologize. We kind of like need to bring up, fun things and have some jokes here, but the situation that we find ourselves in, the government, the only way they're really going to fix it, let me phrase it, they're not going to fix it. The only really way they're going to pretend to fix it is through inflation. And right now, the last thing I'll say here is that just this week, and here we are, it's the March 20th, 2024, the Federal Reserve has hinted that they're going to raise their inflation target from 2% inflation per year to 3%. If that does become their policy, it is going to be a dramatic change in all the financial markets as well as the banking industry. It's going to cause some significant challenges and opportunities at the same time.
Wow. I mean, I think we have to have more conversations like this. I think that there's a lot of people that may not have the knowledge or the education or the resources to learn about this, but they can instinctively feel that something is shifting, or that, I hear a lot of times it's like, but I can't get ahead. I'm working more hours and I'm trying to make more money and I feel like I'm not getting a break. So there's gotta be more, than what meets the eye. And I'm glad that we were at least able to start this conversation. And I think it's something that will continue to pop up. And I think understanding how we can take a part in this and also really just have that hard conversation of what exactly is going on is the first step. So I think we're already in a better place, just acknowledging that this is something that needs to be talked about. So
absolutely. Study Bitcoin. You got it. Study Bitcoin.